Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, warning sign after months of progress. Troubling new developments. This morning, new cases of COVID-19 are back on the rise in some states, despite increasing vaccination rates. ICUs filling up fast and hospital staff pushed once again to the brink. What's fueling this rise and what this could mean for the rest of the country as we head into the winter months? And with more kids getting vaccinated, could this be the end of masks in the classroom? We'll get a doctor's perspective. Subpoenaed. New developments this morning in the investigation into the Capitol Hill riot as a House committee orders testimony and records from several high-profile Trump allies. We'll tell you who was named and why, including new allegations they set up a war room to allegedly try to overturn the election. Disturbing new details in that deadly crowd surge at the Astroworld Music Festival as we learn more about the 8 people who were killed in the crush, the youngest only 14 years old. And now several lawsuits have been filed on behalf of the victims against the concert organizer and rapper Travis Scott.
I think it's self-evident that this concert was planned incredibly poorly, that no regard was given to the safety of these young people at the concert.
More on those lawsuits filed, plus the new report that Houston's police chief went to the rapper directly with concerns before the chaos. And reunited, emotions on display at airports across the country after the U.S. opens its borders to vaccinated travelers from overseas. The heartwarming moments nearly 2 years in the making. I'm sure we'll just keep getting more of this, especially as we head into the holidays.
I love a good airport reunion.
I know.
And that day before Thanksgiving will be a good one, too.
Yeah, absolutely. So cool yesterday to see so many people get on planes as soon as they could to see people they love. We'll get to that a little bit later in this hour. It's a good one, but we begin this morning with the COVID pandemic as we head into the winter and a potential warning sign for healthcare officials across the country.
The U.S. is seeing a lot of positive signs, a decrease in COVID cases and an increase in the vaccination rate. Plus, kids can now get the shot, and the borders have opened up to foreign travelers. But healthcare workers in a handful of states, including Colorado, are warning of a troubling development. They're treating the highest number of COVID patients since December of last year. Just a few weeks ago, like much of the country, Colorado was reporting a low COVID transmission rate and high vaccine turnout. But now 95% of ICU beds are occupied, 95%. Colorado's director of disease control last week described the toll that's taking.
Our healthcare workforce is burned out. And when we talk about beds, those are beds that are staffed. It's not just an empty bed. It comes with a nurse and a doctor and a respiratory therapist and all of the support services that ensure that care can be delivered.
Nearly 40% of hospitals in the region are expecting staffing shortages this week, and doctors are now racing to bring COVID numbers down as we head into winter. There are questions this morning about what's fueling this rise and whether the rest of the country should be concerned. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson joins us now from outside UC Health in Aurora, Colorado with more. Steve, good morning. I know you spoke to doctors about the rise in hospitalizations in Colorado, so what are they saying is behind it?
Well, that's the question that is so confounding to health experts here in Colorado, because this state has done relatively well with COVID. More than 60% of the population has been vaccinated. Those numbers are increasing. Pretty low infection rates here in this state. And so the fact that we're asking basic questions about why these spikes are still occurring has been so troubling. And so now these health experts are throwing things at the wall, wondering if it's the seasonality of COVID, the fact that it's cold, so maybe people are more gathered together in larger crowds because the rules have relaxed. Maybe they're taking mask wearing less seriously. Maybe it's the issue of booster shots because immunizations have been less effective as this COVID crisis has moved forward. That is more murky. What is more clear is on the hospital side, because what's happening in Colorado is sort of a crisis of non-COVID patients. As life has returned to normal, we start to see the effects of that. More car accidents, heart issues, people coming to the hospital for normal methods. The healthcare population has dwindled because people have been so battered by this crisis, especially these healthcare providers that have been hit over and over and over again. And so a lot of them have simply quit. And then one of the biggest factors that we've heard is that people have been delaying care. In other words, when we've had these spikes, some of the operations, some of the normal checkups that people would get have been put aside or delayed, mainly because people have been so hesitant about COVID itself. And so doctors are warning that that has to stop or this ripple effect will continue. I spoke to a doctor with the Colorado Hospital Association about just that. Here's what she thinks is happening. Listen to this.
We are seeing significant hospitalizations due to acute or critical manifestations of delayed care from a few months ago, as well as chronic disease burden that has been with our community for some time. On top of that, we're seeing a significant increase in the COVID-19 transmission in our communities over the last few weeks. So those two factors, so the delayed care from months ago and now the rise in cases of the Delta variant of COVID in our communities is very much putting a lot of pressure on our hospitals.
And of course, we should say that all of this made worse by the fact that still people are not getting vaccinated. Most of the hospitalizations and most all of the ICU hospitalizations are from people that are unvaccinated. Joe?
Steve, quickly on this last point, we've seen healthcare workers in hospitals under the strain of having too many patients. Colorado has a system in place to address that, but officials there are still concerned, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a system that they've never had to use before on this level. We're at Tier 3 now, which basically allows for the transfer of patients more easily, the transfer of information a little bit more easily. There's also been a number of executive authorizations given by the governor's office to allow for that and to prevent, in some cases, those cosmetic surgeries or elective surgeries in this case, because they are at such a crisis level here, Joe.
All right, Steve Patterson. Steve, thanks so much.
Let's now bring in Dr. Hamish Adalja for more on the latest COVID headlines. Dr. Adalja is a senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Dr. Adalja, good morning. Always great to have you with us. So let's just start right there. What do you make of what's happening in Colorado? And are you concerned about what it might mean for the rest of the country? Is this early winter warning sign?
This virus isn't going to go anywhere. This has established itself in the human population, and we know that other coronaviruses do exhibit this seasonality. When it gets colder, when people are packed together, there's going to be increased transmission. And there are parts of the country where they were relatively spared from that Delta surge that we saw in the South and engulfed many parts of the country. So there's different timelines for this virus in different places, plus seasonality. And the fact is, there's still a lot of people that are not vaccinated, especially those with high-risk conditions that maybe aren't 65 or 70 years old, but maybe they're 50 years old and obese, and that's what we're seeing get hospitalized. So the solution to Colorado's problem is still getting more vaccine into people's arms, especially those at high risk for hospitalization, because that's how you keep your hospitals out of crisis, is by having your population as vaccinated as possible. And that's going to be the norm for some time.
And then, Doctor, of course, what happens after you get those shots? Now we're talking about boosters. So Pfizer says they're seeking to get approval to administer boosters for all Americans. Do you think that we're at the point where boosters are just essentially necessary for everyone? This is either 3 doses or 2 doses if you got J&J?
I don't necessarily think everybody benefits the same from a booster. It's clear when you look at the data, people above the age of 65, people with high-risk conditions like the immunosuppressed or people with diabetes, asthma, lung disease, and those individuals who got the J&J vaccine, that's where there's actually strong data that the benefits of the booster are really striking. It's the general healthy population, we're unclear what we're really trying to do, I think, with boosting, because we don't prevent them from getting hospitalized because they're at so low level risk of getting hospitalized. But maybe you're just pushing a breakthrough infection longer into the future, and maybe there's a second generation vaccine that might be better at that. So I don't think boosting healthy people to prevent mild infections is the best use of the vaccine.
Now, let's also talk about something else from Pfizer. They've secured approval for the use of their antiviral COVID pills in the UK. Can we expect to see those pills come to the U.S. anytime soon? And do more of these pills signal a potential end to the pandemic? I mean, how impactful could these be?
They could be tremendously impactful because not only do these pills have the ease of administration that they can be given orally at home, they prevent you from leading hospitalization and prevent you from dying. That's really extraordinary for antivirals. And I do think it really shows what this virus is going to be like in the future, that it's going to become much more manageable and treatable with oral antivirals. And these are slated to be reviewed by the FDA, and hopefully we will see them probably by the end of the year or maybe early next year. And it would really be game-changing if we had a simple, easy oral pill that could keep people out of the hospital. It just makes it much, much better when we have more tools to use treating COVID-19.
Dr. Adalja, as always, thank you so much for your expertise and your time.
This morning, the probe into the January 6th Capitol attack is intensifying. The House committee investigating the insurrection has subpoenaed 6 associates of former President Donald Trump. They're accused of helping him try and overturn the 2020 election. In a statement, committee chair Benny Thompson said, quote, "The former president's closest allies and advisors drove a campaign of misinformation about the election and planned ways to stop the count of Electoral College votes." He added the committee wanted to know every detail about their efforts to overturn the election, including who they were talking to in the White House and Congress, the connections they had with rallies that escalated into a riot, who paid for it all. So far this morning, none of the 6 has responded to NBC News' request for comment. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell joins us now with more on this. So, Leanne, who are the 6 who were served in this latest round of subpoenas, and why did they receive them?
Good morning, Joe. So these 6 are people who are extremely close to the former president, and they were also instrumental in trying to get election officials, either in Congress or in state around the country, to overturn how the people voted. And so this is a chunk of subpoenas that could be very instrumental in this committee's investigation. They include people like former Trump top campaign advisor Bill Stepien, one of his top communication aides, Jason Miller. It also includes John Eastman, the conservative lawyer who wrote that 2-page memo outlining a 6-step plan for former Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the election results on January 6th. Now, these subpoenas are an indication that these people have not cooperated, but we are waiting to see if they actually will cooperate. These subpoenas went out just yesterday, Joe.
Yeah, so Leanne, I mean, we know former President Trump has been urging his ex-associates not to comply with the committee's requests. Do we know what happens if they don't cooperate?
Well, we've seen what has happened with Steve Bannon. He refused to cooperate. He's the only one so far out of more than about 24 subpoenas that have gone out who has not cooperated. And the committee acted swiftly. They recommended to the House of Representatives to refer his case to the Department of Justice for criminal contempt. And they've already done that. The House already passed that. And so that could be in store for these people who don't cooperate. Now, they do have some time. They do have until the end of November to hand over documents, and they have until mid-December to show for deposition. So they still have about a month in most cases to decide if they're going to cooperate or not, Joe.
And quickly, Leanne, on this last question, big picture, where do things stand in the committee's investigation? Could we expect more legal action going forward?
Absolutely. What we're hearing about are these subpoenas. That's the news. That those are the people we know the committee are trying to get information from. But they have already spoken to 150 people, not only in D.C., but around the country, who are cooperating. So this investigation is moving forward, Joe.
All right, Leanne Caldwell, as always, thank you so much.
Now, more than a dozen lawsuits have been filed against Travis Scott and the organizers of Astroworld after 8 people died at the rapper's Houston festival. The deadly crowd surge also left dozens injured, including a 9-year-old boy who remains in a coma. As officials investigate the incident, Scott and festival organizers announced they will be giving full refunds to all Astroworld attendees. Scott also said yesterday he plans to cover the funeral costs for the victims. The youngest one was just 14 years old. Joining us now is NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos. Danny, good morning. So let's talk through some of these lawsuits that we just mentioned. What are they alleging Travis Scott and the concert organizer did here?
Believe it or not, crowd crush cases actually happen fairly often in the United States. And almost universally, the allegations in a civil case are negligence, and more specifically, premises liability. Arguing that these people who paid money to come here are what the law calls invitees. And when you have an invitee on your property, you owe them the duty to protect them from known risks. And that's why what the concert organizers, the venue, and even arguably the artist, what they knew in advance will be critical in deciding whether or not they breached a duty to these invitees, these concert goers.
And so, Danny, we also have this report from the New York Times. It shows that Houston police chief, his name's Troy Finner, who knows Scott personally, actually, met the rapper in his trailer before the show to express concern about the energy in the crowd. He said during the previous Astroworld festival back in 2019, 3 people were injured when crowds overwhelmed staff and rushed the entrance. How could knowing about that conversation, if this did happen, as it did according to the New York Times, prior to this crush, factor into a civil suit?
I saw the sheriff's tweet, and I understand that he's trying to make the point that he raised this issue. But really, if we're talking about the potential liability of Travis Scott, that falls into 2 different categories. Number one, does Travis Scott, even if the sheriff meets with Travis Scott, he's the performer. The question arises, where is he on the spectrum of people who are responsible for concert security? There are arguably folks who are ahead of him on that spectrum. But separately, and I must make this, must emphasize this, even if he had no responsibility as to security, if he did some affirmative act, if he actually did something to incite a crowd surge or a riot or anything like that, he would be separately held responsible. And in that case, potentially even criminally responsible, depending on what he did.
And now, Danny, something else that's getting some attention is the fact that Travis Scott seems to have a bit of a history with issues at his concerts. In 2017, he was actually arrested after encouraging fans to rush the stage at a concert in Arkansas. That incident left several people injured. How will that affect this lawsuit, if at all? Does it, having this kind of pattern of behavior?
This prior pattern affects this lawsuit, at least against Travis Scott, if and only if Travis Scott did something to encourage people to surge. However, these prior acts are significant to place notice on the people who organized the concert. Hey, were you aware that Travis Scott does this, that he gets people all riled up at a concert? And if so, what did you do special to make your security at a Travis Scott show different than it would be at, say, a Barry Manilow show or a Billy Joel concert? More my speed.
And Danny, now this isn't the first time fans have been injured at concerts. I mean, things like this happen. You just mentioned that lawsuits even happen more frequently than we might be aware of. But the fact that 8 people died here, it's of course getting national attention. Do you think venues and artists will start implementing new safety and security measures as a result, especially particular concerts, as to your point there, that have this type of energy are known to, like maybe more medics on site or something like that?
I hate to play comparative tragedy, but decades ago, we had the Great White Concert in New England where 100 people died, partly due to a stampede after a fire. So you had fire and the stampede that killed 100 people. So we've had concerts since time immemorial. There have always been crowds there. Crowds sometimes surge, more likely at some concerts than others. And that's why you have such a patchwork quilt of case law on the topic in the United States. So they will continue to happen, and until the courts figure out who is primarily responsible and impose, we have almost no statutes, no municipal laws on the topic of crowd control at concerts. So this may be a wake-up call finally. All
right, Danny Ceballos, as always, thank you so much.
Jurors will hear more testimony today in the trial of the men accused of killing Ahmaud Arbery. This follows a tense day inside that small-town Georgia courtroom. NBC News correspondent Ron Allen joins us now from Brunswick, Georgia. So, Ron, yesterday, jurors saw graphic photos and heard from the first police officer who arrived on the scene. What were the big takeaways? What can we expect today?
Well, we see how the prosecution is trying to make its case. They're using the police officers who arrived at the scene first and the interviews that they did with the defendants to try and recreate what happened and to try to show what the intent of the defendants was or was not. You know, the case is really 2 versions of what happened. We know what happened. The question is why it happened. On the one hand, Arbery, the prosecutors are arguing that Arbery was an innocent man jogging through the neighborhood and that these defendants attacked him, hunted him down, and attacked him. They're claiming that they saw this man who was suspicious. They were trying to make a citizen's arrest, and they had to shoot him in self-defense. So the prosecution spent some time trying to knock down this citizen's arrest argument, especially in the case of Mr. Bryant, one of the defendants. Here's how they did that by questioning one of the police officers. Take a listen.
Did Brian ever say he was trying to make a citizen's arrest of Ahmaud?
No, ma'am.
Did Brian ever say he was trying to arrest Ahmaud for criminal trespass?
No, ma'am.
Loitering?
No, ma'am.
Burglary?
Didn't mention it. No.
Attempted burglary?
No, ma'am.
Aggravated assault?
No.
The prosecutors are trying to show the jury that these men allegedly were not involved in a citizen's arrest. They were just out to hunt this guy down and attacked him and killed him. Joe?
Ron, that officer also talked about why he didn't try to render medical aid to Arbery when he arrived. What did he say about that?
He said that when he arrived, he didn't think he could do anything for Arbery, that he was already bleeding out, and that he was being the first officer there, he was concerned about his security. He had no idea what was going on, what had happened, so he felt like he had to focus on the wider situation than trying to render medical aid. And he said that he didn't have the training to do this. It didn't go over well with Arbery's family, his mother, his supporters. They felt like more should have been done to save his life, to try and save his life. Joe?
Yeah, Ron, I mean, today's day 3 of the trial. Arbery's mother also says she's been frustrated with the pace of the trial so far. What's she saying about that?
It's been going slowly because the attorneys are arguing about a lot of things. A lot of this has to do with what the defendants said at the crime scene. So they're looking through police reports, they're looking through interviews, and they're picking apart what can be said by one and not the other. And remember, you have 3 defendants being tried at the same time. So the attorneys have tried to separate out what one said, the other. There are all kinds of rules about incriminating another defendant, so on and so forth. But it's very frustrating for the family. They've been waiting almost 2 years for justice. So here's some of what she had to say about the pace of the trial. Take a listen.
Here it is in the middle of the trial. They're coming in with these, all these motions that are just wasting time. They had time enough to prepare for this trial, and now that we're in the midst of it, I don't see what's looking.
The judge had said it would take 2 to 3 weeks. We're in day 2 now, so we'll see. But yes, for the family, it's an agonizing process. Again, the bottom line is they've been waiting so long for their attempt to get justice, and the case is going to be filled with a lot of very graphic video, graphic pictures, because that's how the prosecutors are trying to recreate and show the jury what happened, and show the jury the horror and the humanity of what happened as well, because obviously that's what they hope is going to convince them to convict these 3 men.
All right, Ron Allen. Ron, thanks so much.
After a 200-day mission to the International Space Station, 4 astronauts returned to Earth aboard a SpaceX capsule overnight. Look at that, splashing down in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, while on the International Space Station, the crew completed 4 spacewalks to install new solar panels on the station. And get this, they also collected the first ever space harvest of chili peppers. Their trip home took only 8 hours, and SpaceX plans to send the next crewed mission to the space station as early as tomorrow. Look at that. All right, now let's get a check on your morning news now weather. Janessa Webb is with us today as Bill Cairns continues to rest up from his marathon. Hey, Janessa, good morning.
Hi, good morning. You know, Bill only ran, 26.2 miles. We'll give him another day, right? And he's going to be enjoying all this sunshine. And even for the mid-Atlantic, if you're in that section of the country, you're starting to see a few clouds, but today is the day. We're seeing warmer air making its way in, and it's all due to high pressure. It's coming from the Gulf of Mexico, and that's going to continue to push that warmer air. Now, temperatures across the area, we are about 10 to 15 degrees above average in most spots. Look at DC today, 73 degrees. You cool off just a bit in the upper 60s, but we should be in the upper 50s to lower 60s across most sections of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic for this time of year. So we stay above average for at least the next 36 to 48 hours. Then you'll start to notice a pretty significant change. Even Chicago for today, upper 50s in most spots, and the humidity, it's still in place across the Tennessee Valley. So that's a nice treat compared to all the cooler weather that we've been dealing with. But it's vital you enjoy it, because behind this is a very strong cold front. It's going to bring widespread snow across the Great Lakes, and then temperatures will drop about 15 to 20 degrees as we go into your Friday, into the weekend. Look at Chicago, Savannah, and Joe. By Friday afternoon, they're back in the lower 40s.
All right. Ooh, look at that. Janessa, thanks so much. See you next hour. And coming up next on Morning News Now, our exclusive interview with VA Secretary Dennis McDonough ahead of Veterans Day, what he had to say about prioritizing vets' mental health and more. Plus, former President Obama shares his commitment to fighting climate change at the COP26 summit.
If we don't act and act boldly, it's going to be too late.
Welcome back. As Veterans Day approaches, Secretary of Veterans Affairs Dennis McDonough sat down with our own Courtney Kuby to discuss a wide range of topics impacting vets, including the continued fallout from the withdrawal of Afghanistan and the ongoing debate over COVID vaccine mandates. NBC News Pentagon and National Security Correspondent Courtney Kuby joins us now with more on her exclusive interview. Courtney, good morning. So let's talk first about mental health. I mean, mental health among veterans is always a major focus for the Department of Veteran Affairs. I mean, you think about PTSD, so many things that they go through. And then this summer's U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan impacted a lot of veterans. How is McDonough trying to help them through this, those who are struggling?
Yeah, and one thing that a lot of people don't realize is actually the anniversary of 9/11 is another time where a lot of veterans really struggle. That's what Dennis McDonough told us about. But one way that he pointed to for veterans who are having a hard time for them to reach out is through the Veteran Crisis Line. And that's a way that they can make a call. And if somebody is in an emergency situation, they can get help today. In a non-emergency situation, they can get help within a day or two, he said. And they are really working hard to maintain that standard of getting veterans in crisis the help that they need. But he spoke specifically about how the withdrawal from Afghanistan has impacted veterans and how it actually saw an increase in the number of calls to that Veteran Crisis Line.
And so if you think about the crisis that we're dealing with out of the summer in Afghanistan, the images from Afghanistan, the stories from Afghanistan, we did see an uptick in concern from our veterans. The best way to measure that is we had a 7% increase in the number of calls, texts, chats into what we call the Veteran Crisis Line. If you are in emergency, and it's natural, especially given what's happening in Afghanistan as we approach the holidays, as Veteran Day comes and you think about your mates, your buddies, if you are in crisis, get in touch with us.
Secretary McDonough saying there that it is natural for veterans to have a hard time at certain times of the year. The Afghanistan withdrawal was one of those things that really triggered the need for help among many veterans. And he pointed out it was all ages and all services. It was not just people who actually served in Afghanistan, Savannah.
Now, Courtney, we know the VA was the first federal agency to mandate the COVID vaccine for its employees. How has that vaccination push been going, and what have they been doing to help veterans get vaccinated? How's it been received among them? What did McDonough tell you?
That's right. So they've already passed their deadline. In fact, it was in October. It was several weeks ago. So that was specifically for VA employees who work in healthcare. And that's several 100,000 people. I mean, think about it. An enormous part of what the VA does is healthcare. So as of that deadline in October, only about 70% of the healthcare workers actually were vaccinated. Secretary McDonough explained that as there's a pretty significant lag in people reporting. So there are some people who don't actually get their vaccines at a VA facility. It doesn't necessarily go in the computer. Some of them are, literally handing in pieces of paper and it just doesn't get logged in quickly. So since that deadline, they have had more people report, but he acknowledges that there will be a portion of the VA employees who deny or refuse to get the COVID vaccine. He says the disciplinary process has actually already begun. Now, it starts with counseling. It can take several weeks, but he acknowledges that, look, this may lead to some VA employees being terminated from their jobs. And he says it is too important for the veterans who need this medical care to be safe. And that the way to keep them safe is by making sure that their healthcare workers are vaccinated. But he also gave me an interesting stat. So just last year, the VA also mandated flu shots for all healthcare workers. And about 6% of people requested a religious exemption. He said that those were granted. So unlike the Pentagon, where none have been granted, the VA did grant them, and he expects that some religious exemptions will also be granted for the COVID vaccine, Savannah.
All right, something to definitely watch for there. Courtney, great interview, great exclusive. Thank you so much. Now, former President Barack Obama is urging world leaders to act now on climate change. Speaking at the COP26 Global Climate Summit in Glasgow yesterday, Obama blasted the Republican Party for displaying, quote, active hostility toward climate science. NBC News Chief Environmental Affairs Correspondent Ann Thompson has more.
Like a football coach at halftime. Hello, Glasgow! Former President Barack Obama rallying the climate change conference now in its final week.
We are nowhere near where we need to be yet.
Calling out China and Russia for not doing more to cut greenhouse gases. Then the Democrat aiming his fire at the Trump administration and Republicans.
One of our two major parties has decided not only to sit on the sidelines, but express active hostility toward climate science.
But now some Republicans are here to work on a solution.
My name's John Curtis, and I'm a Republican, and I'm a cop. How cool is that, right?
The head of the Congressional Conservative Caucus came.
We know we must reduce emissions. Now let's have a thoughtful conversation about how we do that.
Also in Scotland, Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski from oil-rich Alaska, warming twice as fast as the rest of the world.
There's an expression, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Murkowski, part of a bipartisan delegation led by Democratic Senator Chris Coons, to reassure those who doubt America's resolve.
By bringing a bipartisan delegation, I'm trying to deliver a partial answer to that question. Will we stay the course?
Murkowski says to move forward on climate change, whether it's tax incentives or a carbon tax, the two parties must work together, as they did on the infrastructure bill.
The only way that we are going to put in place policies that will be enduring, and thus policies that will be effective, is when they are bipartisan.
So the nation has climate policies that can survive no matter which party controls the White House or Congress. Savannah and Joe.
All right, Ann, thanks so much. Let's now take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning. Matt Bodner is with us today from Moscow. Hey, Matt.
Savannah, good morning. We'll start this one off today here in Russia, in the place called the Republic of Mordovia. That's where Trevor Reed, one of the two Americans, both of them former U.S. Marines, are currently incarcerated here in Russia. Reed's family, in a statement, says that he has launched a hunger strike to protest, among other things, the 9-year sentence that he was given for allegedly assaulting a police officer. These are charges that he denies, his family and lawyers deny. He's also protesting the strict regime that he's being held in. They're saying that he's been deprived of mail services. They have not been able to talk to him in quite some time, and they're also refusing access by the U.S. ambassador. Russia's prison service, by the way, this morning denied every single one of these claims. We move along now to Wales, where a man was successfully rescued from a cave system after a massive 2-day rescue effort. The man is said to have been an experienced caver, but he fell and received multiple injuries while exploring the cave system. This cave system, by the way, is around 900 feet deep at its lowest point. Around 250 people were involved in the 53-hour rescue effort. But this actually set the record for longest ever cave rescue effort in Wales. The previous record, 41 hours. We finished up this hour in Japan, where about 70 people, a mix of children and adults, donned costumes and set out to clean up trash on a beach in central Japan. The idea to hold a kind of cosplay beach cleanup operation actually came from local officials who thought it might be a good way to make environmental protection more fun for the community. After the cleanup, everyone took photos to commemorate the effort. Organizers hope to do this again in the future. Back to you.
All right, well, that's sweet and good to see. Thank you so much, Matt. And coming up, with most school-age kids now eligible for the COVID shot, parents are asking, is it safe to get rid of masks in class? Why some doctors are saying you may want to wait. You're watching Morning News Now. Time now to check in on some of the latest mental health headlines. As part of our new series here on News Now, you might remember, we're tackling a range of stigmas this morning, from parenthood to breakups to sobriety. We'll have the best tips on how you can prepare your mind for some of its biggest struggles, especially as we've all had a tough couple years now. Let's bring in Dr. Soumya Dave for more on this. Dr. Dave is a psychiatrist and the author of What a Happy Family and Well-Behaved Indian Women. Dr. Dave, good morning. Great to see you. Let's start here with parenthood. All right. So a lot of people assume having kids might make a person happier. Maybe that's why you have kids in the first place. But this is an interesting one. A new study suggests that the truth is more complicated. I mean, I suppose most things are, but that parents actually experience a decrease in happiness for an extended time. Talk us through this. What are some of the factors that affect how happy people are having kids? Is there a difference between day-to-day happiness, prolonged happiness here? I mean, what does this tell us? Of course, we know it's tough to have kids, but what does this mean?
So there are so many layers to this, and I appreciate a study like this coming to light. So first, when we're thinking about a transition as large as having children, starting a family, we have to think about all of the other factors that impact that transition. So whether we're thinking about things like, does this family have access to parental leave? Do they have access to childcare? Do they have a community? All of those other things around just starting that family can impact a level of happiness as well. And there is this idea that day-to-day happiness and long-term happiness can maybe be different things. So the way we look back on an event might be different than how we feel when we're actually going through the motions of that event. And caregiving especially seems to fall under that category, that we may look back on it with more feelings of happiness and endearment than in the moment of performing those tasks. I think the last part that's so interesting is that we talk about happiness a lot. It's so important, of course. But a lot of times there are other virtues and other emotions that can make an experience meaningful. So when we're thinking about things like purpose, attachment to others, security, all of these other things that might not necessarily include happiness at all times, but can still have a positive impact on our lives.
Absolutely. That's a really good point there. Now, November marks Men's Mental Health Month, and we have a study here that may suggest men are struggling when it comes to relationships. So researchers in the UK and Switzerland found men are more heartbroken than women surrounding breakups. What's the stigma here surrounding men and breakups, and what can men do to better cope with breakups?
So I think for so long, there has been this pressure, and there still is, where it's hard to talk about our emotions. And as we've seen, especially more recently, it's been a lot harder for boys and men to often feel as though they can talk about their emotions openly and really embrace those emotions. And when we have studies like this coming out, we see that things are far more nuanced than we may have believed for a very long time. So I do believe that if we keep having these conversations, we keep also decreasing the stigma around talking about our emotions, making it okay to seek help for our emotional experiences, and also understanding that there are so many nuances to a single experience. I think the study talked about men suffering from the heartbreak part of it a little bit more. And so even a single experience has so many parts to it that can affect different people differently.
Absolutely. Doctor, thank you so much for your time this morning. Such an important topic. We love having this roundup, and we're grateful that you joined us for it.
Thank you so much.
Now, across the country, children 5 through 11 are starting to get vaccinated, but schools nationwide still require children to wear face coverings while in class. NBC News' Dr. Akshay Syal talked to experts on either side of the argument to see if we're nearing the time to do away with masking in schools.
It's one of the biggest issues we've seen in the last few months.
No more masks! No more masks!
The topic is so controversial, some experts have been hesitant to talk about it. Until now.
So we're sleepwalking into indefinite masking is really what's happening.
Look, we need to use data, not dates.
Joseph Allen, a public health expert at Harvard, believes that masks should come off soon.
Fortunately for kids, this virus has spared them the fate that adults have had. The risk to kids from severe disease and deaths has been low.
And now with a vaccine available for kids, he's given a timeline.
We have all the tools we need in place such that we can start to remove these mask mandates in schools. I propose we wait until the end of this year, give people enough time.
You know, you talked about how the risk is so low for children and even lower if they're vaccinated. Why do you think people are so reluctant to have this conversation?
People are understandably anxious. And when we know there have been controls in place, like masks work. And they were great and necessary for that first year and a half when we didn't have another control strategy.
That strategy? Vaccination. For students and teachers alike. But Megan Fitzpatrick, an epidemiologist in Maryland, doesn't believe that this is a realistic goal. She says there's still too much virus in the community.
I think there's still a lot of hesitancy among parents to be addressed and a lot of access issues.
It's kind of understood now that kids are at a lower risk of complications from the virus. So why in your opinion, should kids continue to mask even if they're vaccinated?
I think everyone should continue to mask even if they're vaccinated if there's substantial and high transmission in your community.
Fitzpatrick says we should listen to the CDC and continue to mask up when transmission is substantial or high. But Alan believes that guidance is flawed and wouldn't have a problem sending his own children to school without a mask.
Yes, and I feel comfortable. Now, what's really important there is I'm vaccinated. My wife's vaccinated. I'm boosted. My wife's boosted. Our grandparents, their grandparents are boosted and vaccinated. So the protection is there.
Fitzpatrick, on the other hand,
would you feel comfortable sending them to schools if mask mandates were removed?
I would not feel comfortable sending them to school in high transmission if mask mandates were removed.
While they may have some different viewpoints, they remain steadfast on one.
The best tool is the vaccine. If you are concerned about this virus, you should have your kid vaccinated.
Get vaccinated. That means get your first vaccine if you're eligible, get your booster if you're eligible, get your kids vaccinated if they're eligible. That's what we need to do.
All right, our thanks to Dr. Seil for bringing us that report.
Coming up, small businesses struggling. Why the supply chain crisis is hitting mom and pop shops especially hard.
Yeah, plus above and beyond, the incredible show of brotherhood within the FDNY amid one firefighter's battle with cancer. That's next. This is Morning News Now. Time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Bertha Coombs is with us this morning. Bertha, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Joe. Savannah. So we've got a problem at Robinhood. The company says a hacker breached its systems last week and made off with the personal information of about 5 million of its customers. Trading app says the breach has since been contained. Email addresses were exposed, as were the full names of a different group of about 2 million users. Now, the company is saying no Social Security, bank account, or sensitive financial information like debit card numbers were exposed. And Robinhood says that customers so far have not experienced or reported any financial losses. Meantime, Macy's is raising the minimum wage of its more than 100,000 employees to $15 an hour by May. The move comes as retailers are fighting to hire and keep workers in a competitive labor market. Many chains are worried that they're not going to have enough staff in stores and warehouses during the holidays. Once that increase takes effect, Macy's says its average base pay will be about $17 an hour. And Peloton is finally rolling out a pause button for on-demand classes on its Bike and Bike Plus devices. The company will add the feature to other products like its treadmill sometime in the future. Users who choose to pause workouts do have a price to pay, however. If participating in a live class, that means that they'll lose their rank on the leaderboard, although other metrics like personal records, challenges, and things like that will remain unchanged.
I have been dying for a pause button.
Been on a Peloton.
But you'll lose your rank on the leaderboard.
Really? Okay, yeah, last and will remain last. But the pause button would be so helpful. Sometimes I'm like, shoot, I forgot. You know, I ordered something, somebody's knocking, I'm in a class, I'm like, yeah. Anyway, like it. It's cool. Thanks, Bertha.
The supply chain crisis is impacting small businesses across the country ahead of a busy holiday season. Owners say those major shipping delays are making it harder for them to compete with larger retailers. NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Rule spoke to 2 store owners about what they're facing.
Hey there, Joe and Savannah. Those supply chain issues we've been hearing so much about, well, they are hitting home for many American small businesses, the same businesses that have already been struggling to keep up with the big guys.
A normally busy holiday shopping season is in danger of collapse for small business owners like Candace Huber and Jessica Betancourt, feeling the brunt of the supply chain problems.
I'm scared about what's going to happen this holiday season.
Jessica is the 3rd-generation owner of Clem's, a general store in Spencer, Massachusetts.
We've seen supply chain shortages all over the store, in pretty much every department.
Items Jessica needs to run her business, like lawnmowers and footwear, are not getting delivered.
We normally sell about 70 push mowers a year. This year we were able to receive 5. Normally these shelves would be completely full.
50% of small businesses across the U.S. say supply chain disruptions are significantly affecting their business, and nearly 70% believe these problems will continue for more than 6 months. In New Orleans, Candace Huber owns Tubby & Coos Mid-City Bookshop. Shortages have forced Candace to turn a page on how they operate.
A massive online bookseller, flat out, they can get those books to customers faster?
Yeah, they absolutely can. And, I may be losing some customers, but I'm gaining new customers every day because of my expertise in books.
Candace is usually able to give recommendations for other books if the customer can't find what they're looking for.
I am cautiously optimistic about the future.
But why cautiously optimistic? What gives you a reason to be optimistic at all?
People love books. I do believe that the supply chain issues will work themselves out eventually.
But in the meantime, they'll wait for those shipments.
So guys, the good news, consumer demand is up. Consumer spending is up. So the American consumer is out there and ready to buy. The question is, will these businesses have the goods to sell? Joe, Savannah?
Question on a lot of minds. Stephanie Rule, thank you.
Now to an inspiring story of brotherhood. After one of their own was diagnosed with bone cancer, a team of firefighters worked tirelessly to find him a donor. NBC News correspondent Kristen Dahlgren has this amazing story.
Brian Kevin always answered the call of duty. He became a firefighter in 2000 and ended up at Ground Zero.
My strength comes from the fact that I got 20 years on top of the brothers that didn't, 343 guys, didn't make it home.
It's a brotherhood that was there for Brian when he started battling non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
From day one, carried me through at some of the toughest times.
When no treatment seemed to work.
Unfortunately for Brian, the disease has come back a few times.
So his doctors at Memorial Sloan Kettering recommended one of the last lines of defense, a blood stem cell transplant, if Brian could find a stranger who was a match.
Take this swab.
Again, the FDNY jumped in with donor drives as far away as Las Vegas.
Just to help a brother fireman, he served the city of New York.
And then the news they'd been waiting for, a match, someone already in the system.
Everything's confirmed, the donor collected.
Oh, awesome.
So we have the cells.
A donor Brian doesn't know.
Wow, who is this kid that stepped up to the plate? I look forward to the day I get to meet him and thank him.
Last Thursday, he got his transplant. Today, he's home recovering.
Brian, it's so good to see you. How are you feeling?
For the most part, I'm feeling really good.
Already embracing his new mission, encouraging others to join a bone marrow registry.
You could change someone's life like someone changed mine.
He may no longer wear the uniform, but there is still a hero inside. Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News, New York.
And coming up, families reunited after nearly 2 years apart.
It's just, look at him, it's just, there's no words. You can't describe. How do you describe this feeling,
When we return here on Morning News Now, the emotional airport reunions after the U.S. lifts international pandemic restrictions.
As America's borders start to reopen, we want to share with you some heartwarming reunions at airports around the country.
Some of these families are seeing each other for the first time since pandemic restrictions went into place in early 2020. One lucky grandma even met a new family member for the first time. NBC News Now anchor Tom Yamas brings us some of those moments.
For the first time, London resident Bhavna Patel got to hold her grandson. Over the last year, looking at his photos, she's thought about this moment for a long time.
How are you feeling right now? I don't have words.
Flying to New York on the very first British Airways flight since travel restrictions were lifted, meeting her grandson Kai.
When I was boarding the flight, I told my daughter I'm going to dance, and she said, "Don't be so stupid, don't be so stupid." But yeah, no, I did. It's just, look at him. It's just, there's no words. You can't describe. How do you describe this feeling? Yeah, look. It's such a joy,
The Patel family, separated for nearly 2 years by pandemic restrictions, reunited at last.
We've never met him. I haven't seen my brother and my sister-in-law for 2 years, so it's really nice.
Also reunited for the first time in 9 months, Nirmit and his girlfriend Jolly. She's among the first to arrive from India.
Because of pandemic, all the flights from India were restricted. Because of travel restriction, I could not see her. But finally, she made it here.
I can't even explain in my words how happy I'm. I'm on cloud 9, I can say. So here we are together.
For many of these long-distance couples finally reunited, a day of overwhelming emotions.
So we're really happy that U.S. Customs is opening, and really happy that we can be together and build our lives together, because you know, it's been tough, I think, on a lot of people.
I'm still shaking. I'm very excited that he's here. I'm excited to go on many adventures. There's so much to do to show him. He's been here once before, but it's going to be very special doing this all together.
And as for the Patel family, they simply can't let go, hugging and holding those who have been far away for so long.
Honestly, it felt amazing to see them hugging and holding hands, and yeah, it's just that's the thing that I've missed the most, is them not being able to be together. I'm so glad it happened. I'm so glad it's real. It's amazing. It feels really, really, really good.
Grandmother Bhavna still overcome after 2 years without her most cherished loved ones.
No, I haven't seen any of them. And him, yeah, just elated. You know, there's no words. I don't have any words.
One of those stories every single day.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's so sweet. I mean, meeting a grandchild for the first time, how cool. Very exciting. One of those great things about borders reopening.
Exactly.
Families together again.
Exactly. More to come in the holidays. All right, that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.